Hello to all of my dear friends and loyal listeners. I have something important to tell you today. I have moved to a new home. From now on, every new story, every dark tale, and everything you have been waiting for in the quiet hours of the night will live there, and only there. This channel is being left behind, so if you want to stay with me on this journey into the dark, follow me to where the stories continue. My new channel is called Infinite Darkness, shown right here in the picture. Come and subscribe, turn on the bell, and I will see you on the other side. The next story is already waiting. The night shift at Westland Hospital always left me drained. By the time I pulled into my driveway at 1:30 a.m. on that October evening in 2024, the exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. At 34, I'd been working as an emergency room nurse for nearly a decade, but the late shifts still took their toll. My neighborhood in suburban Austin was exactly what you'd expect. Rows of similar houses with manicured lawns, where the most exciting event was usually someone's sprinkler system malfunctioning. That particular Tuesday night had been brutal. A multi-car accident on the highway had kept our trauma team working non-stop. When I finally made it home, Ren was waiting anxiously by the door. My 3-year-old retriever mix was the only thing that greeted me at home since my divorce last year. Despite my fatigue, his expectant gaze was impossible to ignore. Our nightly walks had become more than routine. They were necessary for both of us. "Give me 5 minutes, buddy," I murmured, changing out of my scrubs into a pair of jeans and a thick sweater. The October air had turned unexpectedly cold, especially for Texas. Weather reports mentioned it was the earliest cold snap in years. I filled Ren's water bowl and grabbed his leash from the hook by the door. His tail wagged with such force that his entire body swayed. Okay, I laughed softly. Just a short one tonight. The subdivision was quiet at this hour. Most families were tucked away in their beds, alarm clocks set for early morning commutes to Austin. My schedule had always been different from everyone else's, one of the many reasons my marriage had dissolved. Night shifts and odd hours meant I lived in the spaces between normal life, in the quiet moments when the world seemed to pause. As I locked the front door behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I scanned the street, seeing nothing but parked cars and darkened windows. The recent rain had left everything with a slick, glossy sheen. Streetlights created islands of visibility in the darkness, their glow reflecting off puddles and wet asphalt. "It's just us, Ren," I whispered, more to comfort myself than him. The night air felt unusually still, almost heavy with anticipation. I tightened my grip on the leash and stepped off my porch into the night. Our usual route took us through Oakshire Drive, past the community playground and back around through Willow Lane. 20 minutes, just enough for Ren to take care of business and for me to clear my head before attempting sleep. The neighborhood had always felt safe. Crime rates were low, neighbors looked out for one another, and most homes had security systems that flashed their tiny red lights like electronic guardians. Tonight, however, something felt off. The recent rain had washed away the usual suburban smells, leaving behind a raw, earthy scent that seemed to heighten my senses. Every sound became amplified. The dripping of water from tree branches, the distant hum of the highway beyond our subdivision, the soft pad of Ren's paws on wet pavement. We had made it about halfway through our route when the first tingle of unease crept up my spine. There were no footsteps, no voice, nothing tangible to explain the sudden alertness that gripped me. Just a visceral, primitive sense that we weren't alone. "Come on, boy," I urged Ren, quickening our pace slightly. He seemed oblivious to my growing discomfort, happily investigating every mailbox post and shrub with his usual thoroughness. The street ahead curved gently, disappearing behind a row of cedar elms. The streetlights here were spaced farther apart, creating pockets of darkness between their spheres of illumination. As we approached one such shadowy interval, I noticed the Jenkins motion sensor light was out. Their house sat dark and still, their driveway empty, probably on that Cancun vacation they'd been planning for months. I hesitated at the edge of the darkness. Something about that particular stretch of road made me want to turn back, to retreat to the safety of my well-lit porch. But that would mean walking all the way around the block, adding another 15 minutes to our journey. Exhaustion won out over caution. "It's nothing," I muttered to myself, stepping forward. Ren followed eagerly, untroubled by the shadows that seemed to reach for us with each step. The silence struck me as unnatural. No crickets chirping, no distant car doors slamming, not even the rustle of wind through the trees. Just the sound of our movement and my increasingly shallow breathing. I found myself straining to hear something, anything, beyond our immediate vicinity. That's when I noticed a strange distortion in the air ahead, right at the edge of the next pool of light. At first, I thought it was just condensation from the recent rain, a wisp of fog, perhaps. But as we drew closer, the shape solidified into something more substantial. A vertical silhouette standing motionless at the periphery of the streetlight's glow. Time seemed to slow as my eyes struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure stood perfectly still, as if planted in the concrete. From this distance, I could discern only the barest details. Tall, lean, wearing what appeared to be a dark coat that hung past their knees. The light from the street lamp hit them at an odd angle, casting more shadow than illumination. Rational explanations flooded my mind. A neighbor having a late-night cigarette. Someone waiting for a ride. A fellow insomniac seeking relief in the night air. Yet none of these possibilities eased the growing knot of tension in my stomach. Ren, normally indifferent to strangers, suddenly tensed. His ears perked forward, his gait becoming stiffer, more alert. He didn't bark or growl, just watched with an intensity I rarely saw in him. "It's okay," I whispered, though I wasn't convinced myself. We were still about 50 yards from the figure, close enough to see but not to distinguish features. I considered crossing the street but realized that would make my discomfort obvious. Plus, there was something about turning my back on this person that felt deeply wrong. I maintained our pace, neither slowing nor speeding up, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. As we drew closer, more details emerged. The figure wore glasses, round ones that caught the light and reflected it back in twin circles of brightness. Their stance was peculiar, feet planted slightly apart as if braced for impact. At 30 yards, I realized the figure was watching us intently. There was no phone in hand, no distraction. Just a focused stillness directed entirely at our approach. My mouth went dry. The neighborhood's silence seemed to deepen, as if everything around us was holding its breath. I tightened my grip on Ren's leash, the material digging into my palm. 20 yards now. I could make out more. Dark hair, pale face, those unsettlingly reflective glasses. No gender-specific features stood out. The person's anonymity somehow made them more threatening. "Evening," I called out, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the quiet. The figure didn't respond or acknowledge my greeting in any way, just continued that unnervingly direct stare. At 15 yards, Ren's behavior changed dramatically. His tail lowered, and a low rumble began in his throat. Not quite a growl, but a warning. In 3 years, I'd never heard him make such a sound. The hair on the back of my neck rose in response. 10 yards. I could see the figure clearly now. A stranger. Definitely not someone from our neighborhood. Their facial expression remained hidden behind those reflective lenses, but their posture communicated a terrible intentness. Lips pressed into a thin line. No movement. No breath visible in the cold air. 5 yards. We were almost parallel now. I felt caught in a horrible gravity, unable to look away as we drew even with this silent observer. Then, just as we came alongside them, the figure did something that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. They began to move, backward, matching my pace exactly, maintaining the same distance, those reflective lenses never wavering from my face. The backward movement was so deliberate, so unnatural, that for a moment I couldn't process what I was seeing. Normal people don't walk backward with such precision, maintaining perfect eye contact without tripping or hesitating. Yet this person did exactly that, each step synchronized with mine as if we were partners in some macabre dance. Ren exploded into frenzied barking. The sudden noise shattered the night's silence, making me flinch. His body strained against the leash, hackles raised, teeth bared. A protective fury I'd never witnessed in my gentle companion. "Easy, Ren," I gasped, struggling to maintain control as he lunged toward the figure. The stranger didn't react to Ren's aggression. No flinch, no raised hands in defense, no quickened pace, just that steady backward movement, those reflective eyes fixed on mine. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screamed danger, yet I couldn't identify exactly what threatened me. No weapon was visible, no words had been spoken. Just this bizarre, coordinated movement that defied normal human interaction. I tried to speed up, hoping to break whatever strange connection had formed between us. The figure matched my increased pace perfectly, still moving backward, still staring. I slowed down. They slowed too, maintaining that precise distance. "What do you want?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound assertive. No response, just that unwavering stare and mechanical movement. Ren's barking grew more frantic. He pulled so hard that the leash cut into my hand, the pain barely registering through my adrenaline. The street suddenly felt too empty, the houses too dark, every potential ally sleeping behind locked doors. I noticed another detail that sent a wave of revulsion through me. The figure's feet seemed to glide rather than step. Their movement was too smooth, too coordinated for someone walking backward without looking. And despite the wet pavement, I heard no footsteps, no scrape of sole against concrete. The intersection of Maple and Birch was about 30 yards ahead, better lit and closer to the main road. If I could reach it, maybe I could flag down a passing car, or at least have more options for escape. Without warning, I yanked Ren's leash and bolted toward the intersection. His surprise at my sudden movement lasted only a second before he matched my pace, still barking wildly. I risked a glance backward, expecting to see the figure in pursuit. What I saw instead was worse. They had pivoted smoothly and were now walking forward, maintaining the same distance, that same measured pace. Their gait was wrong somehow, too fluid, each step identical to the last, like a poorly rendered animation. The intersection seemed miles away. My lungs burned, legs pumping furiously. Ren raced alongside me, his barks punctuating each stride. The sound of my own panicked breathing filled my ears, drowning out everything else. When we finally reached the intersection, I spun around, preparing for confrontation. The street behind us was empty. The figure had vanished as completely as if they'd never existed. I stood at the intersection, gasping for breath, scanning in all directions. Ren continued to bark, facing back the way we had come, his body rigid with alertness. The streetlights buzzed overhead, their light suddenly seeming inadequate against the darkness that pressed in from all sides. "Where did they go?" I whispered, more to myself than to Ren. It seemed impossible for someone to disappear so completely in the few seconds it had taken us to reach the intersection. There were no side streets, no alleyways, nowhere to hide except behind the neatly landscaped yards of the sleeping houses. A car approached, its headlights sweeping across us. For a terrible moment, I feared it might be the stranger, somehow having circled around. But it was just a late-night commuter, probably heading home from a shift similar to mine. They slowed slightly as they passed, perhaps wondering why a woman and her dog were standing frozen at an intersection in the middle of the night. The normalcy of the passing car grounded me somewhat. I tugged Ren's leash gently. "Come on, boy. Let's go home." We took the long way back, sticking to the main streets where the lighting was better. Every shadow made me jump. Every rustle sounded like footsteps. Ren remained on high alert, his ears swiveling at each noise. His pace hurried as if he too couldn't wait to be safely indoors. When we finally reached our house, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly that it took 3 attempts to get the door unlocked. Once inside, I slammed it shut and engaged every lock, deadbolt, chain, even the rarely used sliding bolt at the bottom. The familiar confines of my living room should have provided comfort, but instead, the windows seemed like vulnerable points, each one a potential frame for that reflective stare. I moved through the house, checking locks, closing blinds, turning on lights, then turning them off again when I realized they made me visible while obscuring what might be outside. Ren paced nervously, whining and checking the windows himself, his earlier protective fury now transformed into anxious vigilance. I filled a glass with water and drank it in gulps, trying to steady my nerves. What had I just experienced? The rational part of my brain searched for explanations. A prankster targeting random nightwalkers, someone with mental health issues, a performance artist pushing boundaries of social interaction. None of these explanations addressed the wrongness of the movement, the perfect coordination, the complete silence. And none explained Ren's reaction, my steady, friendly dog who had never shown aggression toward anyone. I sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, debating who to call. The police? What would I tell them? That someone walked backward and scared me? No laws had been broken, no threats made. Just that terrible silent watching and unnatural movement. My supervisor at the hospital? She'd probably attribute it to fatigue after a difficult shift. My ex-husband? He'd use it as further evidence that I was too high-strung, the same criticism he'd leveled during our marriage. In the end, I called no one. What could anyone do now, anyway? The encounter was over. I was safe inside my home. By morning, it would probably seem like an exaggeration born of exhaustion and darkness. But as I finally crawled into bed, Ren curled protectively at my feet. I couldn't shake the image of those reflective glasses, twin circles of light hiding whatever eyes lay behind them. Eyes that had watched me with such focused intensity that it felt like a physical touch. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house settling, every distant car passing, every whisper of wind against the windows kept me rigid with alertness. Dawn, when it finally came, brought little relief. The next day passed in a haze of exhaustion and unease. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, but the thought of returning home in the dark after another night shift was unbearable. Instead, I spent the day securing my house, checking window locks, installing a new chain on the back door, ordering a security camera system that promised next-day delivery. Ren stayed unusually close, following me from room to room, his usual playfulness subdued. Whenever the mail carrier approached or a delivery truck rumbled by, he rushed to the window, hackles raised, until he confirmed it wasn't a threat. By afternoon, lack of sleep and constant vigilance had left me jittery and irrational. Every passing pedestrian visible through my blinds became a potential danger. I found myself studying their gaits, their postures, searching for similarities to the figure from the night before. I tried researching online, typing vague queries like stranger walking backward, reflective glasses stalker, and unusual stalking behaviors. The results were unhelpful. Urban legends, horror movie plots, psychological studies on unusual human movement. Nothing that matched my experience. As evening approached, I faced a dilemma. Ren needed his walk. He'd been inside all day, but the thought of venturing out made my stomach knot with anxiety. The sun was still up, I reasoned. Daylight made everything safer, more normal. We would stay on the main road, avoid the side streets, and keep it brief. Just a quick one, I promised Ren as I reluctantly clipped on his leash. His enthusiasm was muted, his usual pre-walk excitement tempered by his own lingering wariness. Outside, the neighborhood looked different in daylight. Ordinary, benign. Neighbors mowed lawns, children played in driveways. Cars came and went in the rhythm of suburban life. The previous night's terror seemed distant, almost imagined. We stuck to our plan, walking only on the busiest street, nodding to neighbors, keeping a brisk pace. No sign of anyone unusual. No reflective glasses or strange movements. By the time we returned home, my shoulders had begun to unknot, my breathing to ease. "See, nothing to worry about," I told Ren, who seemed equally relieved to be back inside. Maybe it had been a one-time encounter, some strange anomaly never to be repeated. That fragile comfort shattered when night fell. Darkness transformed my windows into black mirrors, reflecting the interior lights while hiding whatever might be outside. I found myself constantly checking them, expecting to see that figure standing in my yard, watching, waiting. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and dream-plagued. In my nightmares, I walked endless suburban streets, always aware of someone behind me, matching my pace exactly. When I turned to confront them, they were gone, only to appear ahead of me, those reflective lenses catching non-existent light. I woke gasping at 3:17 a.m., convinced I'd heard something outside my bedroom window. Ren was already alert, staring at the blinds, a low growl building in his throat. I froze, listening intently. Nothing. Just the normal sounds of the night. Distant traffic, the hum of the refrigerator, the central air cycling on. Still, I couldn't shake the certainty that someone was out there. I reached for my phone, finger hovering over the emergency call button. What would I say? That I had a feeling? That my dog was growling at the window? After 10 minutes of paralyzing indecision, I forced myself to get up and look. Pulling back the blind a fraction of an inch, I peered into my backyard. The security light illuminated the empty patio, the still swing set left by the previous owners, the fence line beyond. Nothing moved. No figure stood watching. I sagged with relief, chiding myself for overreacting. Yet even as I returned to bed, I couldn't recapture any sense of security. Ren remained vigilant, his eyes fixed on the window, his body tense. Neither of us slept again that night. 3 days passed. I returned to work, functioning on minimal sleep and maximum caffeine. My colleagues noticed my distraction, the dark circles under my eyes, but attributed it to the usual stresses of the job. I didn't correct them. How could I explain what was happening without sounding unhinged? The security cameras arrived and I installed them myself. One covering the front yard, one for the back, another monitoring the side of the house where my bedroom window faced. Their presence provided some comfort, a technological shield against the unexplainable. Ren's walks became daytime-only affairs, quick utilitarian outings that kept us within sight of the house. At night, I let him use the backyard, standing guard at the door while he did his business, rushing him back inside at the slightest unusual sound. By the fourth night, exhaustion had begun to override fear. I needed real sleep, unbroken by paranoia and nightmares. After my shift ended, I drove home with the radio blaring to keep myself alert, pulled into my driveway, and sat for a moment gathering the energy to move. The dashboard clock read 1:42 a.m. The neighborhood was still, houses dark except for the occasional porch light. Normal. Safe. I was being ridiculous, letting one strange encounter upend my entire life. I let myself into the house, greeted Ren with our usual quiet affection, and decided that tonight would be different. We would take our normal walk, reclaim our routine, stop letting fear dictate our lives. "What do you think, buddy? Ready for a real walk?" I asked. Ren's tail wagged tentatively, as if he wasn't sure whether to be excited or concerned. We set out under clear skies, no recent rain to create those reflective puddles from nights before. I'd brought a flashlight this time, its beam stronger than my phone's light. We took our usual route, my confidence growing with each uneventful block. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, the only sounds our footsteps and Ren's occasional sniffing investigations. We had completed almost the entire circuit, were just 2 blocks from home, when Ren stopped suddenly, his body going rigid. I followed his gaze down the street ahead of us. At first I saw nothing. Then movement caught my eye, a figure emerging from between 2 houses, stepping onto the sidewalk about 100 yards ahead. Even at this distance, recognition hit me with physical force. The height, the posture, the dark coat. And most tellingly, those glasses catching the streetlight in twin circles of reflection. Ren's growl vibrated through the leash into my hand. Fight or flight surged through my system, my body flooding with adrenaline. This time, I chose fight. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking the night silence. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't respond or acknowledge my shout. Instead, it began walking toward us with that same measured pace I remembered, each step identical to the last, creating an impression of gliding rather than walking. I raised my flashlight, aiming the beam directly at them. The light hit those reflective lenses and bounced back at me, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, the figure had stopped, standing perfectly still about 50 yards away. "I've called the police," I lied, voice shaking despite my attempt at bravado. "They're on their way right now." Still no response. Just that terrible stillness, that focused attention. Then, slowly, deliberately, the figure raised one hand, not in greeting or threat, but to adjust those reflective glasses, pushing them higher on the bridge of their nose. The gesture was so ordinary, so human, that it somehow made everything worse. This wasn't some supernatural entity or hallucination. This was a person, deliberately terrorizing me. Ren's growl deepened, his body trembling with restraint. I had a sudden, terrible certainty that if I released his leash, he would attack, and that the figure wanted exactly that. "Stay back," I warned, my free hand fumbling for my phone. This time, I really would call the police. This was harassment, stalking, something tangible I could report. Before I could unlock my screen, the figure did something new. They tilted their head, a subtle movement that conveyed curiosity or consideration. Then, with deliberate slowness, they began to smile. A wide, empty expression that never reached whatever eyes lay behind those reflective lenses. That smile broke something in me. I turned and ran, dragging Ren with me, no longer caring about appearing afraid or vulnerable. All that mattered was distance, escape, the safety of walls and locks and lights. We fled down unfamiliar side streets, taking random turns, my only goal to get away from that terrible smile and those watching eyes. When we finally stumbled onto our street, approaching our house from the opposite direction than usual, I was gasping for breath, legs burning, terror a metallic taste in my mouth. I burst through the front door, slamming it behind us, engaging every lock with frantic haste. Ren paced and whined, still agitated. I collapsed against the door, sliding down until I sat on the floor, phone clutched in my shaking hand. This time I did call the police. When the operator answered, I struggled to explain. A stalker, someone following me on my walks, the strange behavior, the evident targeting. The dispatcher was professional, but skeptical. Without a direct threat or trespass, there wasn't much they could do. They promised to send a patrol car through the neighborhood, took my information, and advised me to stay inside. Not exactly the response I'd hoped for. But what had I expected? They couldn't arrest someone for walking strangely or wearing reflective glasses. I spent the rest of the night checking my security camera feeds, watching for any sign of the figure approaching my property. Nothing appeared. No strange silhouette. No reflective glasses. Just the empty street and still yards of my sleeping neighborhood. A week passed. Then 2. No further sightings occurred despite my constant vigilance. The patrol car the police had promised drove by a few times, but found nothing suspicious to report. Life began to resume its normal rhythm, though I remained cautious. No more night walks, no more shortcuts through poorly lit areas. I installed additional security lights around my house, bought a Ring camera for my front door, considered, then rejected, the idea of getting a gun. My hospital had seen too many accidental shootings for me to feel comfortable with a firearm. Gradually, reluctantly, I began to wonder if I had overreacted. Perhaps the figure had been just a socially awkward person with an unusual gait. Perhaps their silent watching had been social anxiety rather than malice. Perhaps their backward walking had been some personal eccentricity rather than a deliberate attempt to frighten me. Yet Ren's reaction troubled these rationalizations. My gentle dog had recognized something threatening before I had responded with unprecedented aggression. Animals sensed things humans missed. Wasn't that common knowledge? 3 weeks after the second sighting, I was working a particularly difficult shift. A multi-vehicle accident on the interstate had brought in several critical patients simultaneously, stretching our ER team to its limits. By the time things calmed down, I was 2 hours past my scheduled departure, dead on my feet with exhaustion. The hospital parking garage was nearly empty when I finally reached it, just a scattered few cars belonging to night shift workers. My footsteps echoed between concrete pillars as I made my way to my assigned space on the 3rd level. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, some flickering with age, creating strobing patches of shadow and light. I kept my keys clutched in my hand, a habit ingrained in all hospital workers who left at odd hours. I was almost to my car when I heard it. Footsteps behind me, perfectly matching my pace. I stopped. The steps stopped too, the echo dying away into silence. I turned slowly, expecting to see another hospital employee heading to their vehicle. Instead, I saw that familiar silhouette standing motionless about 20 yards away, those glasses reflecting the fluorescent glare. My throat closed. Here. Away from home. Away from Ren. Away from any neighbors who might respond to a scream. This was where they had chosen to confront me. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice bouncing off the concrete walls. "Why are you following me?" For the first time, they spoke. A voice neither distinctly male nor female, calm and oddly familiar. "Don't you recognize me?" The question froze me in place. I squinted, trying to see past those reflective lenses, to make out features in the shadowed face. "We should," they continued, taking a step forward. "We work together, after all." Confusion replaced some of my fear. A coworker? I tried to match the voice to someone at the hospital, someone on my shift, but the garage acoustics distorted the sound. They took another step forward, then reached up and removed the glasses. Without the reflection obscuring their face, I finally saw them clearly. Recognition hit me like a physical blow. It was Wyatt from radiology. Quiet, reserved Wyatt, who I passed in hallways several times a week but rarely spoke to. Wyatt, who had asked me out 6 months ago, who I had gently declined, who had seemed to accept the rejection with good grace. "Wyatt?" I whispered, disbelief coloring my voice. "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" He smiled, that same empty expression I had seen on the street. "You never really saw me before. At work, I'm just background to you. But now you notice me, don't you? Now you think about me even when I'm not there." A cold understanding dawned. The stalking, the strange behavior, the deliberate terror. It had all been to force me to pay attention to him, to make himself unforgettable in my mind. "You've been watching my house," I said, the pieces falling into place. "Following me on my walks." He nodded, seeming pleased that I understood. "I learned your routines. When you walk that dog, which windows you leave unlocked, how you always check under your car but never behind it." My skin crawled at the invasion, the violation of privacy, the deliberate cultivation of fear. Why the backward walking? The silence? It worked, didn't it? He asked, tilting his head in that now familiar gesture. Got your attention? Made you remember me? Made you think about me all the time? I took a step backward, bumping into my car. My hand tightened around my keys, the longest one protruding between my fingers in the self-defense position taught in hospital safety seminars. This stops now, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm reporting you, to the police, to hospital security, to administration. His smile faltered for the first time. They won't believe you. It'll be your word against mine. A few walks through your neighborhood, that's not illegal. I never threatened you. Never even spoke to you until now. I have camera footage, I lied. My security cameras hadn't captured him, but he didn't know that. Uncertainty flickered across his face. You're lying. Want to risk your job to find out? I countered, finding strength in his hesitation. Want to risk your license, your freedom? We stood in stalemate, the fluorescent lights humming above us, the empty garage stretching around us. Then something changed in his expression, the intensity fading, replaced by calculation. It doesn't matter, he said finally. I accomplished what I wanted. You'll never forget me now. Every time you walk that dog, every time you hear footsteps behind you, every time you see someone wearing glasses like these, he held them up. You'll think of me. I'll always be there in your mind. The truth of his words settled like ice in my stomach. He had altered my sense of safety, inserted himself permanently into my consciousness. Even if he never approached me again, the damage was done. He must have seen the realization on my face because his smile returned, satisfied now. See, I matter to you now. Without another word, he placed the glasses back on his face, turned, and walked away. Normally this time, no backward movement, no synchronized pace. Just a man walking to the stairwell, disappearing through the door as if our encounter had been nothing more than a casual workplace conversation. I stood frozen until the door closed behind him. Then I fumbled with my phone, called hospital security, and reported everything. They arrived quickly, took my statement, reviewed the garage security footage which had indeed captured our interaction, though not his admission. In the following days, official complaints were filed, restraining orders processed, HR meetings held. Wyatt was suspended pending investigation, then terminated when garage footage confirmed his presence near my car on multiple previous occasions. The police took statements but warned me that without direct threats, prosecution would be difficult. The restraining order was the best protection the legal system could offer against this particular brand of psychological terrorism. I moved out of my house the following month, finding an apartment in a secured building with 24-hour doormen, changed hospitals, changed my routine, took self-defense classes, bought a stronger flashlight that doubled as a striking tool. But Wyatt had been right about one thing. I never forgot. Even now, years later, in a different city with a different job, I still check the reflection of glasses when I pass strangers on the street. I still listen for footsteps that match my pace too perfectly. I still wake sometimes, certain I've heard movement outside my window. The greatest horror isn't in supernatural threats or monstrous creatures. It's in the ordinary human who decides, for reasons you may never fully understand, to make you the focus of their disturbed attention. It's in the realization that the barrier between normal life and consuming fear is thinner than you ever imagined. And it's in knowing that while restraining orders and security systems can keep a person physically distant, nothing can remove them from the corridors of your mind once they've taken up residence there. Ren still barks sometimes at seemingly nothing, his eyes fixed on empty spaces. In those moments, I wonder if he senses something I cannot, or if he too carries the memory of that figure with the reflective glasses, walking backward in perfect synchronization, watching us with that terrible, focused intent. I wonder if he, like me, is still walking that night road in his dreams, forever approaching a silhouette that never comes fully into view, forever feeling those hidden eyes tracking our every move. Sometimes I think the greatest power we give to those who terrorize us is not our fear in the moment, but the permanent space we create for them in our minds afterward. The psychic real estate we can never quite reclaim. That, perhaps, is the true victory Wyatt claimed that night in the parking garage. Not just that he made me afraid, but that he made himself unforgettable. And in the darkest hours of the night, when sleep abandons me and every sound becomes a potential warning, I still find myself wondering if he's out there somewhere, watching, waiting. His glasses catching the light in twin circles of reflection, his smile empty of everything except satisfaction at a terror perfectly crafted and delivered. It was late September 2023, a month after my 34th birthday, when I made that fateful decision to venture into the wilderness alone. My job at the accounting firm had become increasingly demanding, with 60-hour work weeks becoming the norm rather than the exception. The fluorescent lights of my office seemed to drain my energy, leaving me exhausted yet paradoxically restless. The monotony of spreadsheets and client meetings had created a pressure that built steadily behind my eyes. I needed an escape, something to break the cycle of wake, work, sleep. Nature had always provided that escape when I was younger, though I'd fallen out of the habit in recent years. "You need to get outside more," my doctor had advised during my annual physical 3 weeks prior. "Your blood pressure is higher than I'd like to see in someone your age." That Saturday morning, I woke before my alarm, the pale autumn sunlight filtering through my blinds. My apartment felt unusually confining, the walls too close, the air too still. I made a spontaneous decision while brewing my coffee. I would go hiking. Not just around the local park, but somewhere new. Somewhere I could truly disconnect. I remembered a conversation with a coworker who had mentioned Black Pine Loop, a trail about an hour's drive from the city. "It's not very popular," he'd said, "but that's what makes it perfect if you want some real solitude." Solitude was exactly what I craved. I packed hastily, throwing a water bottle, a granola bar, and a light jacket into my backpack. I searched online briefly for a trail map, but found only vague directions to the trailhead. That should have been my first warning, but in my eagerness to escape, I dismissed it. The drive was surprisingly pleasant. The highway gradually gave way to country roads, and then to a narrow, winding lane that cut through dense forest. The trees, mostly pine and oak, created a canopy overhead, dappling the road with shifting patterns of light and shadow. My phone lost reception about 15 minutes before I reached the small gravel parking area marked by a weathered wooden sign, Black Pine Loop Trail. I remember feeling a profound sense of relief as I stepped out of my car. The air was different here, crisp, laden with the scent of pine and wet earth. I locked my car, adjusted my backpack, and approached the trailhead. The path ahead disappeared into the trees, narrow but clear enough to follow. I paused to take a photo of the trail sign with my phone, thinking I might post it online later. Looking back, I wish I had shared my location with someone, anyone, before losing reception. But hindsight offers little comfort now. The beginning of the hike remains clear in my memory. The trail was slightly overgrown but navigable, winding through stands of tall pines and occasional clearings. Birds called in the canopy above. A squirrel darted across my path. Everything seemed so ordinary, so peaceful. I remember checking my watch about 45 minutes into the hike. It was just past 10:30 a.m. I had been maintaining a steady pace, and according to the trail information I'd found online, the entire loop should take about 3 to 4 hours to complete. That's the last clear memory I have until I found myself driving home, hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, the setting sun casting long shadows across the road. Somehow nearly 6 hours had vanished from my mind. The transition from memory to blackout wasn't gradual. There was no fuzzy edge, no sense of things slowly fading away. One moment I was walking along the trail, noting a peculiar formation of rocks to my right that resembled a crouching figure. And then, nothing. The last sensory impression I recall with clarity was the sudden stillness. I had been listening to the forest sounds, the rustling leaves, distant birdsong, the soft crunch of my boots on the path, when everything seemed to stop. Not in a dramatic, supernatural way, but in that subtle manner that makes the back of your neck tighten. The way silence falls in the woods sometimes when a predator passes nearby. I remember pausing, looking around, feeling a growing awareness that something wasn't right. The air felt heavier, somehow resistant against my skin. The colors of the forest seemed slightly off, as though viewed through a faintly tinted lens. I had taken a few more steps, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone to check the time. Then, blank space. A void where memories should be. My next conscious moment was behind the wheel of my car, driving down the highway toward home. The dashboard clock read 6:17 p.m. My hands were dirty, fingernails rimmed with soil. My hiking boots were caked with a dark, reddish mud I didn't remember stepping in. Several small scratches marked the backs of my hands, and my right knee ached dully. The shock hit me gradually. I pulled over at a gas station, hands trembling as I tried to piece together what had happened. Had I fallen? Hit my head? But there was no pain, no bump or bruise to suggest a head injury. Had I simply lost track of time, zoned out while walking? But nearly 6 hours. That seemed impossible. I searched my pockets, looking for any clue. My phone was there, battery nearly dead. I checked my recent photos, hoping I'd taken pictures during the hike that might jog my memory. There was only the single photo of the trailhead sign, nothing more. My call history showed no outgoing or incoming calls, no texts sent or received. The only other evidence was a strange collection of small objects in my jacket pocket that I had no memory of collecting. 7 smooth black pebbles, unusually uniform in size and shape, and a small twig with 3 perfectly symmetrical forks. Why would I have gathered these things? I had no answer. As I continued driving home, an unsettling thought surfaced. What if I had encountered someone else on that trail? What if something had happened? Something my mind was protecting me from. The highway lights blurred as anxiety tightened my chest. I found myself checking the rearview mirror repeatedly, though I couldn't have explained what I was looking for. By the time I reached my apartment, darkness had fallen completely. I locked the door behind me, then checked it twice. I emptied my pockets, laying out the mysterious pebbles and twig on my kitchen counter, staring at them as if they might speak, might offer some explanation. They remained silent, inert, yet somehow accusatory. That night, sleep proved elusive. I lay awake, replaying the fragments of memory I still possessed, trying to bridge the gap. Outside my window, the wind moved through the city streets, carrying sounds that seemed amplified in the darkness. A car door slamming, voices in conversation, the distant wail of sirens. Ordinary sounds that now carried undertones of warning. When exhaustion finally pulled me under around 3 a.m., my dreams were filled with trees. Endless rows of them, their trunks too straight, too uniform, like soldiers standing at attention. And throughout the dream, a persistent sensation of being followed, of eyes watching from just beyond my peripheral vision. Sunday morning arrived with harsh clarity, sunlight streaming through my bedroom window where I'd forgotten to close the blinds the night before. For a brief, merciful moment, the events of the previous day seemed distant, almost imaginary. Then reality reasserted itself as I noticed the mud-caked hiking boots by my door. The physical evidence was undeniable. Besides the dirty boots, my jeans from yesterday had grass stains on the knees. The scratches on my hands were shallow but numerous, like I'd pushed through dense underbrush. And there was a larger scrape on my forearm I hadn't noticed the night before, about 3 inches long, crusted with dried blood. I examined myself in the bathroom mirror, turning to check for any injuries I might have missed. My reflection looked back at me, pale and exhausted, but otherwise normal. No head injuries, no bruising that might explain the memory loss. Just the haunted look in my eyes, a look of someone who no longer trusted their own mind. The strange collection of pebbles still sat on my kitchen counter. In the morning light, they appeared less ominous, just ordinary stones, though their uniformity remained peculiar. The twig, however, seemed even more unnatural than I'd first thought. Its 3 forks were not just symmetrical, but identical in length and angle, something I'd rarely seen in nature. I forced myself to eat breakfast, though the food tasted like nothing. My thoughts kept circling back to the missing hours, generating scenarios that grew increasingly disturbing. Had I wandered off the trail, encountered wildlife, met other hikers with harmful intentions? Around noon, I decided to check my camera roll again, scrolling through photos from the past few weeks. There was nothing unusual until I reached yesterday's date. After the trailhead photo, there were 5 more images I had no memory of taking. The first showed a section of the trail where it narrowed between 2 large boulders. The second captured a clearing with unusually tall grass. The third was blurry, showing what might have been a deer or other animal in the distance. The fourth showed my own shadow stretched across the ground, elongated strangely. The fifth and final photo made my stomach clench. It showed nothing but dense trees, but they were exactly like those described in the online forum post I'd read. Unnaturally thin, their trunks twisted in spirals, their bark patchy and diseased-looking. The image was slightly tilted, as if taken hastily. I stared at this last photo for a long time, trying to reconcile it with my fragmented memories. I had no recollection of seeing these trees, much less photographing them. Yet here was evidence that I had. That afternoon, I called in sick for Monday, knowing I wouldn't be able to focus on work. My head felt heavy, stuffed with cotton, my thoughts sluggish yet racing simultaneously. I found myself staring at my hiking boots for long periods, as if they might suddenly speak and tell me where they had walked. The scratches on my hands began to itch intensely around sunset. When I examined them again, they seemed to form a pattern. Not random scratches from branches, but almost like marks deliberately placed. The thought sent a surge of adrenaline through me. Was I imagining things now? Seeing patterns where none existed? That night, I dreamed of walking through the forest again, but in the dream, the trees were watching me, their bark splitting open to reveal eyes that tracked my movement. I woke at 2:17 a.m., drenched in sweat, certain I had heard something moving in my apartment. I lay frozen, listening intently, but the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and my own ragged breathing. I turned on every light and searched each room, looking behind furniture, in closets, under the bed. There was nothing, of course. Nothing but the growing certainty that something had followed me home from that forest. Monday morning found me sitting in my doctor's waiting room, leg bouncing nervously as I checked my watch repeatedly. I had called as soon as the office opened, describing my symptoms as sudden memory loss and disorientation. The receptionist had hesitated before scheduling me for the earliest available appointment. Dr. Westfield had been my physician for nearly a decade. His office was a familiar space of muted colors and outdated magazines, usually a source of reassurance. Today, it felt confining, almost threatening. "So, tell me what's going on," he said after the nurse had taken my vitals and left us alone in the examination room. I explained about the hike, the missing hours, waking up driving home with no memory of how I got there. I showed him the scratches on my hands and the larger scrape on my forearm. I mentioned the headache that had been building since yesterday, the difficulty concentrating, the strange dreams. He listened attentively, his expression neutral. When I finished, he began a series of tests, checking my pupils, testing my reflexes, asking me to follow his finger with my eyes, to touch my nose, then his finger, then my nose again. Any history of seizures? He asked. Fainting spells? Episodes like this before? I shook my head to each question. Any drug use? Alcohol before or during the hike? No, nothing like that. He frowned slightly. And you're certain about the timeline? You checked in at the trailhead around 9:30 a.m. and your next clear memory is driving home around 6:00 p.m. Yes, I confirmed. Almost 6 hours, just gone. He made notes in my chart, his pen scratching across the paper. Physically, you seem fine. No signs of concussion or neurological issues that I can detect. Your blood pressure is elevated, but given the circumstances, that's not surprising. So what happened to me? I asked, hearing the edge of desperation in my voice. Dr. Westfield leaned back in his chair. There are several possibilities. Transient global amnesia is one. It's a temporary disruption of memory formation, usually lasting several hours. It's rare, especially in someone your age, but not unheard of. Stress can be a trigger. But I wasn't particularly stressed during the hike, I protested. The opposite, actually. I went to relax. The brain is complex, he said simply. Another possibility is what we call a dissociative episode, a psychological response where a person disconnects from their thoughts, surroundings, even their identity. Often it's triggered by trauma or extreme stress, but sometimes it can happen with no obvious cause. I thought about this. So I was, walking around in some kind of trance for 6 hours? Possibly functioning quite normally, he corrected. People in dissociative states can drive cars, have conversations, perform routine tasks. They just don't form memories of it. The thought was profoundly disturbing, that I might have been moving through the world, interacting with it, while some essential part of me was absent. I'd like to run some basic blood work, Dr. Westfield continued, to rule out any physical causes, and I'm going to refer you to a neurologist for further testing, including an MRI. I nodded, grateful for concrete action, though doubt gnawed at me. Would an MRI show 6 missing hours? Would blood work reveal what happened in that forest? As I was preparing to leave, Dr. Westfield paused, his hand on the door. One more thing. I'd advise against returning to that trail, at least until we have more information. Whatever triggered this episode might still be present there. His warning was unnecessary. The thought of returning to Black Pine Loop filled me with visceral dread. Yet even as I assured him I would stay away, a part of me knew that the forest held the only real answers to my questions. That evening, I received a call from the neurologist's office. The earliest appointment was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks of not knowing, of questioning my own mind. The prospect was intolerable. I turned instead to the internet, searching more thoroughly for information about Black Pine Loop. Most results were as I remembered: brief mentions on hiking forums, a few outdated trail maps. But then I found something new. A local news article from 2019 about a search and rescue operation in the area. A hiker had gone missing for 2 days before being found wandering along a road several miles from where he'd parked. The article was frustratingly vague about the circumstances, mentioning only that the man was disoriented and dehydrated when found. There was no follow-up article, no indication of what had happened to him during those missing days. I searched for more information about this incident but found nothing. It was as if the story had appeared briefly and then been deliberately forgotten. Just like my missing hours. By Wednesday, the scratches on my hands had mostly healed, but the larger scrape on my forearm had developed an unusual redness around its edges. It didn't appear infected. There was no warmth, no swelling, but the skin surrounding it had taken on a slightly mottled appearance, like a subtle bruise that wouldn't fade. Sleep had become increasingly difficult. I would lie awake until exhaustion finally overcame anxiety, only to wake frequently throughout the night. My dreams, when they came, were fragmented but always set in the same forest. In these dreams, I was searching for something among the trees, though I never knew what. The sense of urgency was overwhelming, matched only by the dread of actually finding whatever it was I sought. That morning, as I showered, a flash of memory struck me with such sudden clarity that I gasped aloud. I was back on the trail. But it wasn't the section I remembered from the beginning of my hike. In this memory, the path narrowed significantly, barely visible among thick underbrush. The air felt dense, almost gelatinous, difficult to breathe. And there was a sound, a low, constant hum that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. The memory lasted only seconds before dissolving, leaving me standing in the shower, water running cold, my heart racing. Was it real? An actual fragment of my missing time? Or was my mind manufacturing false memories to fill the void? I called in sick to work again, unable to face the prospect of normal conversation, of pretending everything was fine. Instead, I spent the day researching memory loss, dissociative episodes, even the geological and environmental history of the area where Black Pine Loop was located. I learned that the region had been heavily logged in the early 1900s, then partially replanted in the 1950s. There were no significant environmental hazards noted, no abandoned mines that might leak gas, no toxic waste sites. The area was unremarkable geologically, with no unusual formations or cave systems that might explain my experience. By afternoon, my search had taken a darker turn. I found myself reading about cognitive effects of various toxins, parasites that could affect human behavior, even obscure psychological conditions that might explain my symptoms. None seemed to fit exactly. As evening approached, I received an unexpected call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was a long pause before a man's voice spoke. "Is this the person who posted about Black Pine Loop?" I hadn't posted anything online about my experience. "No," I replied cautiously. "But I did hike there recently." Another pause. "Did you see anything unusual?" My grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "That doesn't matter," the voice said. "What matters is that you stay away from there. Don't go back." "Why?" I demanded. "What's out there?" "Nothing good," he replied. "Nothing you want to remember." Before I could ask anything else, the call ended. I tried calling back immediately, but the number was already disconnected. The call left me shaken, pacing my apartment, checking the locks repeatedly. Who was this person? How had they found me? And what did they know about Black Pine Loop that I didn't? That night I dreamed of the twisted trees again. In the dream, I was standing among them, my hand reaching out to touch one of the spiraled trunks. As my fingers made contact with the bark, it yielded like flesh, warm and pulsing. I jerked awake, the sensation so vivid I could still feel the texture against my fingertips. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. In the mirror, my reflection looked haggard, eyes sunken with exhaustion. As I lowered my hands from my face, something caught my attention. A small, dark mark on my right wrist that I hadn't noticed before. Under the harsh bathroom light, I examined it closely. It wasn't a bruise or scratch, but what appeared to be a small pattern pressed into my skin, like an ink stamp nearly faded away. The design was geometric. A circle containing what might have been a stylized tree or branch. I scrubbed at it with soap and water, but the mark remained. It wasn't ink. It seemed to be under the skin, like a tattoo beginning to heal. A tattoo I had no memory of getting. The room seemed to tilt around me as implications cascaded through my mind. If someone had marked my skin, what else might have been done to me during those missing hours? What else might I be carrying inside me, unknown, unseen? A week passed. The mark on my wrist neither faded nor became more pronounced. The neurologist's appointment remained weeks away. My work suffered as concentration became increasingly difficult. Colleagues noticed my distraction, my jumpiness, the dark circles under my eyes. I deflected their concerns with vague references to insomnia, to stress. The mysterious phone call was not repeated, but its warning echoed constantly in my thoughts. Stay away from there. Don't go back. I tried to follow this advice. I truly did. But as days passed with no answers, only more questions, the certainty grew that Black Pine Loop held the key to understanding what had happened to me. The decision to return was not made in a single moment, but accumulated gradually, like sediment building into stone. By Friday evening, it was no longer a question of if, but when. I prepared more carefully this time. I charged my phone fully and brought a portable battery. I packed extra water, food, a first aid kit, a flashlight. I told a colleague I was going hiking and would check in with him by 5:01 p.m., a safety measure I should have taken the first time. Most importantly, I brought a small digital voice recorder. If my memory failed again, perhaps technology would succeed where my mind could not. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. The drive to the trailhead seemed shorter this time, more direct, as if the road itself was eager for my return. The gravel parking area was empty when I arrived, just as it had been before. The same weathered sign marked the trail entrance, Black Pine Loop Trail. Standing at the trailhead, I activated the voice recorder. It's 9:17 a.m., I spoke clearly. I'm about to begin hiking Black Pine Loop for the second time. My purpose is to discover what happened during my previous visit. I paused, then added, if you're listening to this and I'm not around, something went wrong. The first section of trail was exactly as I remembered, winding through tall pines, occasionally opening into small clearings. I narrated my progress into the recorder, describing landmarks, noting the time frequently. 9:45 a.m., approximately 1 mile in, nothing unusual so far. 10:12 a.m., past a distinctive fallen tree crossing the path, still following the main trail. As I hiked deeper into the forest, tension built within me. Each step brought me closer to the point where my memories had previously ended. Would it happen again? Would I suddenly wake up hours later with no recollection of what had transpired? Then I saw it. The peculiar rock formation I had noted just before my memories cut off last time. It resembled a crouching figure, though it was clearly just an unusual arrangement of natural stones. I stopped, heart pounding. 10:38 a.m., I spoke into the recorder. I've reached the last point I clearly remember from my previous hike. Beyond this is unknown territory. I stood for several minutes, observing, listening. The forest seemed ordinary enough. Birds called overhead. A slight breeze moved through the canopy. Nothing suggested danger or abnormality. Taking a deep breath, I continued forward. The trail narrowed as it descended into a slight depression. The air felt cooler here, shadows deeper as the trees grew closer together. I kept the recorder running, describing everything I saw. After another 15 minutes of hiking, the trail split. The main path continued straight, while a narrower, less distinct trail branched to the right. I hesitated, trying to intuit which way I might have gone during my first visit. The narrower path drew my attention. It seemed familiar somehow, though I couldn't place why. I decided to follow it, carefully marking the junction with an arrangement of sticks so I could find my way back. This secondary trail quickly became more overgrown, requiring me to push through undergrowth occasionally. The scratches on my hands from my previous visit suddenly made more sense. 11:07 a.m., I recorded, following a side trail that branches from the main loop. Vegetation is denser here. No clear footprints or signs of recent passage. The forest changed subtly as I continued. The predominant pines gave way to other species I couldn't identify. The trees grew closer together, their trunks thinner, their arrangement somehow more regular than would occur naturally. A faint humming sound became noticeable. Not mechanical, but like the collective buzzing of distant insects. The air felt heavier, more resistant, just as I had fleetingly remembered in the shower days earlier. 11:23 a.m. There's a sound here, a vibration almost. The air quality is different. The trees are unusual. I stopped abruptly as the trail opened into a small clearing. At its center stood a circle of those twisted trees I had seen in the 5th photograph on my phone. Unnaturally thin, their trunks spiraling upward, bark patchy and diseased looking. There were 13 of them, arranged in a perfect circle about 20 feet in diameter. The humming was louder here, emanating seemingly from the ground itself. The air within the circle appeared slightly distorted, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. 11:26 a.m. My voice shook slightly as I recorded. I've found the trees from the photo. They're arranged in a circle. Something about them seems wrong, unnatural. I approached cautiously, staying outside the circle. The trees were even stranger up close. Their bark was not like normal tree bark. It was smoother, with an almost manufactured quality, the pattern too regular. The spiraling of the trunks was identical for each tree, as if they had been deliberately twisted by some immense force. At the base of one tree, I noticed a small pile of stones, black, smooth, uniform in size. Identical to the ones I had found in my pocket after the first hike. These are the same stones, I recorded. Someone placed them here deliberately. As I circled the formation, staying well back from the trees themselves, I noticed marks in the soil, indentations that might have been footprints, though they seemed too regular, too precise. Following them, I discovered a flat stone about the size of a dinner plate, partially hidden beneath fallen leaves. Kneeling, I brushed the leaves away to reveal a symbol carved into the stone's surface, a circle containing a stylized tree or branch, the same symbol that had mysteriously appeared on my wrist. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The humming intensified, becoming less a sound and more a physical sensation that vibrated through my bones. The air within the circle of trees seemed to thicken, to pulse. There's a symbol, I managed to record, my voice now barely more than a whisper. It matches the mark on my wrist. I think I've been here before. Memory surged back with crushing force, not in fragments or glimpses, but in a torrent that drove me to my knees. I remembered everything. I remembered walking this same path a week ago, feeling drawn to the twisted trees just as I had been today. I remembered the building hum, the thickening air, the strange quality of light within the circle. I remembered stepping into that circle, curiosity overcoming caution. The sensation had been immediate and overwhelming, like stepping into an electrical field, every hair on my body standing on end, skin tingling painfully. The memories continued to flood back as I knelt outside the circle of trees, hands pressed against my temples as if to contain the pressure building inside my skull. I remembered seeing the stone with its carved symbol, kneeling to examine it just as I had done moments ago. But last time, I had touched it, traced the symbol with my fingertip. The stone had been warm, vibrating slightly in rhythm with the humming in the air. Upon touching it, the humming had intensified dramatically, becoming a roar that filled not just my ears, but my entire consciousness. The trees had seemed to bend inward, their twisted forms elongating impossibly, reaching toward me. Then there had been others in the clearing. 3 figures wearing dark clothing, their faces obscured by what looked like beekeeping veils. They had appeared suddenly, as if stepping out from behind the twisted trees, though there had been nowhere for them to hide. "You shouldn't be here," one had said, voice muffled by the veil. I had tried to run, but my limbs had felt leaden, movement sluggish as if moving through syrup. The figures had surrounded me, their movements too fluid, too coordinated. "It's watching," another had said. "It's chosen." They had pressed me to the ground, pinning my arms and legs. One had produced a small device resembling a stamp or branding iron. I had struggled, but their strength had been surprising, their grips unyielding. The device had been pressed against my wrist, a quick, sharp pain followed by spreading warmth. "Marked," the figure had announced. "The connection is established." I remembered being pulled to my feet, marched through the forest along paths that didn't appear on any trail map. We had walked for what seemed like hours, the twisted trees appearing with increasing frequency as we progressed. Eventually, we had reached a larger clearing containing a structure. Not a building exactly, but a sort of pavilion made of the same twisted trees, their upper branches woven together to form a canopy. Inside, more veiled figures moved about, tending to equipment I couldn't identify. I had been seated in a chair at the center of this pavilion, restraints secured around my wrists and ankles. A device like a crown or helmet had been lowered onto my head, cold metal pressing against my temples. "The preparation is complete," someone had announced. "Begin the extraction." Pain had exploded inside my skull, white hot, unbearable. I recalled screaming until my voice gave out, my body convulsing against the restraints. Throughout it all, the veiled figures had watched impassively, occasionally adjusting dials on equipment arranged around the chair. "Sufficient," a voice had eventually declared. The pain had ceased abruptly, leaving me limp and disoriented. The restraints had been removed. I had been guided, half carried, back through the forest. My mind had been emptied, hollowed out. I remembered one of the figures speaking directly to me before releasing me near the main trail. "You will not remember this, but it will remember you, and when it calls, you will return." Then they had left me, and I had somehow found my way back to my car and driven home, the experience already fading from my conscious memory. Now, kneeling outside the circle of twisted trees, the full horror of what had happened, what had been done to me, crushed down like a physical weight. They had taken something from me, extracted something, and they had marked me for some purpose I couldn't begin to comprehend. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the circle of trees, from the carved stone. The humming had intensified, becoming almost visible as a distortion in the air. The mark on my wrist burned, throbbing in time with the hum. "I remember," I gasped into the recorder, which had captured every revelation. "I remember everything. There are people here, in the forest. They did something to me. They put this mark on me. They—" A sound from behind me, a twig snapping. I whirled around to see 3 figures at the edge of the clearing, wearing the same dark clothing, the same veiled hats. "You returned," one said, voice carrying clearly despite the distance and the intensifying hum, "as we knew you would." "Stay back," I shouted, fumbling in my pocket for my phone. "I've told someone where I am. They're expecting me to check in." "No one will miss you," another figure responded with terrible certainty. "No one ever does." I turned and ran, crashing through underbrush, abandoning the trail entirely. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing, their movements coordinated, efficient, gaining on me with every stride. The forest seemed to work against me, branches whipping at my face, roots rising to catch my feet. I fell repeatedly, each time struggling up to continue my desperate flight. My lungs burned, legs weakening as fear and exertion took their toll. I realized with growing despair that I was lost, with no idea which direction would lead me back to the main trail, to my car, to safety. A clearing appeared ahead. I sprinted toward it, hoping for a landmark, some indication of where I was. Instead, I found myself facing another circle of those twisted trees, identical to the first, as if the forest had somehow looped back on itself. I turned to run in another direction, but my pursuers were there, blocking my escape. They approached slowly now, confidently, knowing I had nowhere left to go. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" "We are merely servants," the central figure replied. "It is not what we want. It is what it needs." "What? What needs me?" The figure gestured toward the circle of twisted trees. "The forest has been changing for decades, growing, evolving, becoming aware. It requires sustenance of a specific kind. Memories, experiences, fragments of consciousness." "You're insane," I whispered. "Look at your arm," the figure commanded. "The mark is already spreading." I glanced down at my wrist. The symbol was indeed changing. Fine lines extending outward from the circle, creeping up my forearm like roots or veins. "The connection has been established," the figure continued. "The first extraction was merely preparation. Today, the forest will take all of you." They moved forward in perfect unison. I backed away, feeling the strange, thick air of the tree circle against my back. The humming had become a physical force, vibrating through my body, resonating with the spreading mark on my arm. "No," I pleaded. "Please." "Your resistance is noted," one said almost gently, "but unnecessary. Many have stood where you stand. All have contributed. All have served." My back pressed against one of the twisted trees. The bark felt warm, pulsing, alive in a way no tree should be. To my horror, I felt it yield slightly, adhering to my shirt, beginning to enfold me. In desperate panic, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my lighter, a habit I'd maintained despite quitting smoking years ago. With shaking hands, I flicked it to life and touched the flame to the bark of the tree embracing me. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. The tree recoiled, the bark splitting with a sound like a scream. The humming changed pitch, rising to a wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "No!" one of the figures shouted. "The connection must not be broken." I didn't wait to see more. I ran, lighter still in hand, igniting anything that tried to block my path. The forest itself seemed to recoil from the flames, creating a corridor of retreat. Behind me, the veiled figures gave chase, but they moved more slowly now, their perfect coordination disrupted by the fire spreading through the underbrush. The wailing intensified, a sound of rage and pain that seemed to come from the earth itself. I ran without direction, without thought, driven purely by survival instinct. My only goal was distance, to get as far from those twisted trees, those veiled figures, as possible. How long I ran, I couldn't say. Eventually, I broke through a line of trees and found myself on a road. Not the one where I had parked, but a county highway I recognized from my drive to the trail. I flagged down a passing car, an elderly couple who seemed alarmed by my appearance but willing to help. They drove me to the nearest gas station, where I called the police. I reported being attacked by strangers in the forest, omitting the more inexplicable elements of my experience. The officers who responded seemed skeptical, especially when I couldn't provide a clear location of the attack or a detailed description of my assailants. They drove me back to my car, which was still parked at the trailhead. As we approached, smoke was visible in the distance. Apparently, my desperate use of the lighter had started a forest fire. The officers immediately called it in, then advised me to leave the area as emergency services would soon be closing the roads. I drove home in a state of numb shock, the reality of what had happened, what I had done, settling over me like ash. That was 3 weeks ago. The forest fire was contained within a day, burning approximately 50 acres according to news reports. Officials attributed it to careless hikers, a description I cannot dispute. The mark on my wrist has stopped spreading, but remains visible, a constant reminder that my experience was not hallucination or delusion. The neurologist found nothing unusual in my brain scans, no physical explanation for my episode of memory loss. When I described my symptoms more fully, he suggested I consult a psychiatrist. I've done so, but have been selective about what I share. Some truths are too outlandish to be believed, even by professionals trained to listen without judgment. I've researched obsessively since my escape. I've found scattered reports of similar incidents in forests across the country, hikers with missing time, unexplained markings, stories of veiled figures dismissed as hallucinations or inventions. Most are buried in obscure forums or local newspapers, quickly forgotten or rationalized away. The voice recorder captured everything: my returning memories, the confrontation with the veiled figures, my desperate escape. I've listened to the recording dozens of times, searching for any detail I might have missed, any explanation that might make sense of what happened. There is none. The only explanation is the one given to me in that clearing. Something ancient and terrible is growing in those woods, something that feeds on human consciousness, human experience, and it has servants who help it harvest what it needs. The mark on my wrist no longer spreads, but sometimes it throbs, usually when I'm dreaming. In these dreams, I'm back in the forest, standing among those twisted trees. But in the dreams, I'm not afraid. I'm waiting, watching. Part of me is still there, I think. The part they took during that first extraction. I've considered going to the authorities with my recording, my photographs, the mark on my wrist. But what would they do? Send officers into those woods, only to have them return with missing hours and marks of their own? Or perhaps they wouldn't return at all. Instead, I've started reaching out to others. People who've posted online about similar experiences. Not just at Black Pine Loop, but in forests across the country. We share our stories, our evidence, our theories. We warn others to stay away from places where the trees grow too straight or too twisted, where the air feels too thick, where silence falls too suddenly. Most importantly, we warn them about the circles, the perfect arrangements of trees that are not arrangements at all, but something else, something hungry. I don't know if the fire destroyed the twisted trees, the veiled figures, whatever intelligence was growing there. Part of me hopes it did. A larger part knows better. Fire might set back such an entity, but something capable of altering a forest, of manipulating human consciousness, would not be so easily destroyed. Whatever it is, it's patient. It thinks in decades, centuries, and it's spreading. As for me, I no longer hike. I avoid forests entirely. The outdoors that once offered escape now promises only terror. I've moved to a new apartment in the center of the city, surrounded by concrete and steel and human activity. I sleep with the lights on. But sometimes, standing at my window at night, looking at the distant tree line beyond the city limits, I feel a familiar humming. Not in my ears, but in my bones, in the mark on my wrist. And I know that someday it will call me back. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Because part of me is still there, feeding whatever grows among those twisted trees. And it never forgets what belongs to it. I never planned to become a park ranger in the Alaskan wilderness. 6 months ago, I was drowning in student debt and stuck in a cubicle job that slowly drained my soul. When the position appeared in my job alerts, Wilderness Ranger, Remote Station, Tongass National Forest, something deep inside me resonated with it. The listing mentioned extreme isolation, self-sufficiency required, and wildlife encounters expected, as if they were warnings. To me, they sounded like promises. The interview was conducted over a spotty satellite connection. Chief Ranger McKenna, a weathered woman with eyes that had seen too much wilderness, seemed surprised by my enthusiasm. Most applicants back out when they understand how remote Nagitli Station really is, she said, the indigenous name rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. 3 days hike from the nearest road. Supply drops once monthly. No cell service. Just you, the forest, and whatever lives in it. That's exactly what I'm looking for, I replied. 2 weeks later, I was in a float plane soaring over endless green, watching mountains rise like ancient guardians from mist-shrouded valleys. Below us, pristine lakes mirrored the sky, unmarred by human presence. The pilot, a man of few words named Rivera, pointed toward a tiny clearing where a rustic cabin sat at the edge of a perfect oval lake. Nagitli, he said, means watcher at the edge in the local language. It's been a ranger station for 60 years, but the indigenous people had stories about this place long before that. The cabin was more substantial than I expected. A sturdy two-room structure with a stone fireplace, solar panels, and a small radio setup for weekly check-ins. Behind it stood a storage shed and a small dock extending into the clear waters of Lake Akiwaga. Mountains surrounded us on three sides, with the fourth opening into deep forest that stretched for hundreds of miles. Rivera helped unload my supplies, gave me a brief orientation, then prepared to leave. As he readied the float plane, he paused. Listen, I know McKenna gave you the official briefing, but there's something you should know. The last 3 rangers at this station requested transfers within a month. One left the service entirely. Why? I asked, feeling the first flutter of uncertainty. They said they felt watched. I fly supplies to a dozen remote stations, and this one feels different. He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. Probably nothing. But keep your radio charged and your bear spray closer. With that cryptic warning, he was gone, the drone of the float plane engine fading until only the sounds of the wilderness remained. Wind through tall pines, water lapping at the shore, and distant bird calls. I spent that first day organizing supplies and familiarizing myself with the cabin. The previous ranger had left everything impeccably clean and organized, though I found notes in the logbook that grew increasingly terse and anxious toward the end. The final entry simply read, "Something broke the motion sensor again. Not an animal. Going to request early extraction tomorrow." That night, I sat on the cabin's porch watching darkness claim the wilderness. The vastness of the Alaskan taiga stretched before me, ancient and indifferent to my presence. Stars emerged in breathtaking clarity, unhindered by light pollution. For the first time in years, I felt peace, until I heard the knocking. 3 distinct knocks from deep in the forest, like someone striking a hollow tree with tremendous force. Then silence. I waited, heart suddenly pounding, but the sound wasn't repeated. I consulted the Ranger Handbook on Wildlife Behaviors. Bears sometimes clawed at trees, but the sound was unmistakably deliberate. I made a note to check for woodpecker activity in the morning, though the knocks had been far too powerful for any bird. Sleep came reluctantly that first night. Every creak of the cabin settling, every gust of wind against the windows jerked me back to alertness. By dawn, exhaustion had overcome vigilance, and I fell into uneasy dreams. My first week passed in a routine of boundary patrols, wildlife observations, and habitat assessments. The work was physically demanding, but deeply satisfying. I cataloged bear activity, monitored eagle nests, and mapped invasive plant species. Each day brought new discoveries: a hidden waterfall, a meadow carpeted with wildflowers, the tracks of animals rarely seen by human eyes. But always, there was the feeling of being observed. It wasn't constant. Hours would pass in perfect solitude. Then suddenly, while crouching to photograph animal tracks or pausing to consult my map, awareness would prickle across my neck. I'd turn to find nothing but silent trees swaying in the breeze. On the 8th night, I woke to the sound of heavy footsteps circling the cabin. Slow, deliberate, with a weight that no human could produce. I lay frozen, listening as whatever it was completed a full circuit, paused at the porch, then retreated into the forest with receding crunches of pine needles. The next morning, I found massive tracks in the soft earth around the cabin. Barefoot, but impossibly large, easily twice the size of my size 11 boots. The stride length measured nearly 7 feet. No bear walks exclusively on hind legs for that distance. I photographed the prints before they were erased by a sudden rainfall, knowing how implausible they would seem to others. That evening, I radioed McKenna for my scheduled check-in. "How are you settling in?" she asked after we'd covered the official report items. "Well enough," I hesitated. "I've been finding some unusual tracks around the station. Larger than bear, bipedal. And there are sounds at night." A long silence followed. "The indigenous people called that area Nagitli for a reason," she finally said. "It means watcher at the edge, but there's more to the story. They believed it marked the boundary between the human world and something else. Something older." "Are you talking about—" "I'm not talking about anything officially," she interrupted. "Officially, you're reporting possible bear activity, but I'll tell you what my predecessor told me. Whatever you do, don't follow it into the deep forest. The station is safe ground, has been for generations. Stay close to the cabin after dark." The radio crackled with static as if something was interfering with the signal. "We're breaking up," I said. "One more thing." Her voice came through broken and distorted. "If you hear your name called from the forest, even if it sounds like someone you—" The connection died completely. That night, I dreamed of walking through endless trees, following massive footprints that led deeper and deeper into darkness. In the distance, something enormous moved between ancient trunks, always just out of clear sight. I woke gasping, the first light of dawn filtering through my window. Something had scratched symbols into the cabin door during the night. The marks on my cabin door resembled no animal scratches I'd ever seen. 3 vertical lines crossed by 2 horizontal ones. Deliberate, geometric, carved with precision into the wood. I photographed them, then consulted the station's reference materials for similar indigenous symbols. Finding nothing, I added detailed notes to the logbook, alongside the previous ranger's increasingly disturbed entries. That morning, I hiked to the ridge overlooking Lake Akiwagi-Nji, partly for scheduled environmental monitoring, partly to clear my head. The vast wilderness stretched in every direction, 100 shades of green beneath the bright blue Alaskan sky. Ravens wheeled overhead, their calls echoing across the valley. As I adjusted my binoculars to count eagle nests on the far cliffs, movement caught my eye near the forest edge below. Something large moved through the tree line, not with the meandering path of a bear, but with purpose. Though mostly obscured by vegetation, its height was striking, towering above the undergrowth. It paused, and despite the distance, I felt with absolute certainty it was looking directly at me. I lowered my binoculars, heart hammering. When I raised them again, whatever it was had vanished. That afternoon, I encountered Konstantin, one of the few humans within 50 miles of my station. An elderly Tlingit man who lived in a small cabin near the southern boundary of my patrol area. He supplemented his subsistence fishing by serving as an unofficial guide for the rare adventurous tourist. His weathered face brightened at the sight of a visitor. "The new watcher at Nagitli," he said, inviting me in for tea. "I wondered how long before you'd find your way here." His cabin was small but immaculately kept, walls adorned with traditional carvings and family photographs spanning generations. As we sipped strong black tea, I described the tracks, the knocking, and the symbols carved into my door. Konstantin's expression grew somber. My grandmother called them Kushtaka, the land otter men of our stories. Others have different names. The Russians who trapped here called them Leshy, forest masters. The gold miners had cruder names. He shrugged. "Names don't matter. They've walked these forests since before humans came." "You're talking about Bigfoot," I said, the word feeling ridiculous in my mouth. He frowned. "That Hollywood name trivializes something ancient, something that remembers when glaciers covered this land." "But they're not real," I said, immediately regretting how dismissive it sounded. Rather than taking offense, Konstantin smiled with genuine amusement. Tell that to whatever carved your door last night." He rose and retrieved an old leather-bound journal from a shelf. My great-grandfather was guide for a Russian expedition in 1887. A scientist, 2 hunters, and a photographer. They came looking for evidence. He opened the journal to reveal detailed sketches in faded Cyrillic script. Only my great-grandfather returned. The sketches showed the same symbol that had been carved into my cabin door. "What does it mean?" I asked. "Boundary. Warning. The exact meaning is lost, but it's always found at the edge of their territory." He closed the journal. "Your cabin sits on safe ground, neutral territory established by agreement older than written history. But they're reminding you of the boundary." "This can't be real," I said, though doubt had begun to erode my certainty. "Whether you believe doesn't matter to them," he replied. "But disrespect their boundaries and belief becomes unnecessary. Experience replaces it." As I prepared to leave, Constantine handed me a small carved wooden pendant on a leather cord. "My grandmother made this protective charm. I've never needed it. They know me. But you're new. Until they decide about you, wear it." I accepted it to be polite, slipping it around my neck beneath my ranger shirt. "One more thing," he added as I stepped outside. "If you need to leave your cabin at night, always bring fire. They respect fire. It's the one human thing that truly belongs to us alone." That evening, returning to my station, I noticed fresh tracks crossing my path. The same enormous barefoot prints. They paralleled my route back to the cabin, always keeping just within the tree line, watching my progress. I tried radioing McKenna again, but received only static. The atmospheric interference had worsened, though the sky remained clear. Even my emergency satellite phone showed no signal, though it had worked perfectly during testing. Night fell with an oppressive stillness. No wind rustled the trees, no animals called in the darkness. Just silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I checked my equipment, bear spray, flare gun, rifle, making sure everything was within easy reach. Though the previous ranger's logbook mentioned constant equipment failures, particularly with the motion-sensing cameras, I set them up around the cabin perimeter anyway. Sleep seemed impossible, but eventually exhaustion won. I dreamed of walking through misty forest, following someone just ahead of me who kept calling my name in a voice almost but not quite like McKenna's. I woke to the sound of breathing, heavy, rhythmic breathing just outside my window. Frozen in my bed, I watched as a shadow darkened the glass, too tall, too broad to be human. It remained motionless, silhouetted against the night sky. Minutes passed, each second stretching into infinity. Then, with deliberate slowness, a massive hand pressed against the window, fingers splayed, covering most of the glass. Not a bear paw, unmistakably a hand, with an opposed thumb and distinct fingers, but scaled to impossible proportions. The wood frame creaked under pressure, but held. The ancient boundary, Constantine had said. Safe ground. Morning light revealed no tracks, but one of the motion sensors had been carefully dismantled, not smashed or damaged, but taken apart piece by piece, its components arranged in a precise line at the forest edge. The other cameras showed nothing but static, except for one image, a blurred frame of something massive moving with shocking speed directly toward the lens. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m., exactly when I'd felt the presence at my window. That day, on routine patrol, I found evidence of territorial marking throughout my assigned area. Trees broken at impossible heights, arranged in unmistakable patterns. Rock formations that defied natural erosion or animal activity. Everywhere, subtle signs that something intelligent had shaped this wilderness according to its will. The most disturbing discovery came at dusk, as I followed a game trail back toward the station. Ahead on the path lay a neatly arranged pile of my own garbage, Empty food containers and papers I had securely stored in the cabin's trash bin. Items that could only have been taken from inside while I was away on patrol. They had been inside my cabin, touching my belongings, while I hiked oblivious through their territory. I broke into a run, racing the falling darkness back to the station. Behind me, from deep within the trees, came the sound of 3 powerful knocks, followed by what could only be described as laughter, deep, resonant, and undeniably inhuman. That night they surrounded the cabin. I knew they were there before I saw them. The pressure in the air changed, like the heaviness before a thunderstorm. My ears popped. The radio emitted a continuous low static that rose and fell like breathing. Outside, the forest had gone completely silent. No insects chirping, no night birds calling. Even the lake water seemed to still its gentle lapping against the shore. At precisely midnight, they began to circle the cabin. Through the windows I caught glimpses, massive shadows moving with deliberate slowness. Their footfalls vibrated through the floorboards. Something scraped against the outer walls, not aggressively but with a curious, testing quality. They were probing the boundary. I clutched the flare gun, knowing ammunition for the rifle would be useless, remembering Constantine's words about fire. The old pendant he'd given me seemed to grow warm against my skin, though that was surely imagination. A tapping came at the window. Not threatening, but rhythmic. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow taps. The same pattern as the symbol carved into my door. I found myself responding, tapping the same rhythm on the wooden table before I could question the impulse. The movement outside stopped. Complete stillness followed. Then, from directly outside the front door, came a series of complex knocks and vocalizations. Deep, resonant sounds no human throat could produce. They were communicating, and clearly expected me to understand. Against every rational instinct, I moved to the door. Hand trembling, I opened it just enough to see outside. It stood 7 feet away, exactly at the edge where the clearing met the forest. In the moonlight, its proportions were difficult to process. 8 feet tall at minimum, with a breadth of shoulder that made it seem almost as wide as it was tall. Dense hair covered its body, not fur but something coarser, darker than the night around it. Its face remained in shadow, but I could feel its gaze with physical intensity. The intelligence behind that stare was undeniable and ancient. This was no animal. Whatever category separated humans from other creatures, this being belonged with us, not them, though perhaps in a classification entirely its own. For a full minute we regarded each other across the threshold. Then, with deliberate slowness, it raised an enormous hand, palm open, fingers splayed. A gesture universally recognizable as non-threatening. A greeting. Reason told me to shut the door, to radio for emergency extraction at first light. But some deeper instinct, something primitive and true, made me raise my own hand in mirror response. The creature nodded once, a profoundly human gesture, then melted back into the forest with shocking silence for something of its size. I stood in the doorway long after it disappeared, my mind struggling to integrate what I'd witnessed. When I finally closed the door, my hands were steady. Fear remained, but alongside it grew something else. Curiosity. The same curiosity that had driven me to this remote wilderness in the first place. In the morning, I found gifts at the forest edge. A cluster of rare medicinal herbs tied with spruce roots and a perfectly spherical stone of a type not native to the region. Offerings, or perhaps tests. I left dried fruit and a small carved wooden figure I'd brought from home in the same spot. That day, I hiked to the ridge where I'd first spotted movement in the forest. Instead of continuing my patrol route, I deliberately ventured deeper, following game trails that showed signs of recent passage. Broken branches too high for deer or moose. Distinctive footprints in muddy patches. The forest changed the further I walked. Trees grew older, more massive. The undergrowth thinned, revealing a cathedral-like space beneath the canopy. Nurse logs hosted colonies of fungi in colors I'd never seen before. The air smelled different, richer, charged with petrichor and something musky. 3 hours in, I found structures. Not natural formations, but not human architecture either. Saplings bent and woven into complex shapes. Larger trees grown deliberately around rock formations. Everywhere, evidence of patient manipulation of the environment over decades, perhaps centuries. In a clearing stood what could only be described as monuments. Towering arrangements of massive logs and boulders that defied engineering logic. At the center, freshly constructed, was a miniature version of my own cabin, created from twigs and bark with painstaking accuracy. Even the solar panels had been represented using shiny mica flakes. I circled it, marveling at the craftsmanship, when something caught my eye. A small figure placed inside the replica. Stepping closer, my breath caught. It was me. A tiny, perfect representation carved from dark wood, down to my ranger hat and the pendant around my neck. They'd been watching me since before I arrived. The realization sent a chill down my spine. A branch snapped behind me. I turned slowly, knowing what I would find. 3 of them stood at the clearing's edge. The one from last night, flanked by 2 others even larger. In daylight, details became clear that darkness had concealed. Their bodies were powerfully muscled beneath the coarse hair, with proportions both human and not. Longer arms, barrel chests, sloped foreheads above deep-set eyes that reflected more intelligence than I was prepared to confront. Their faces were not what popular culture had conditioned me to expect. Not ape-like, but distinctly their own species. Heavy brow ridges, broad noses, pronounced jaws. Completely foreign, yet capable of expressions unmistakably conveying thought and emotion. The central figure, the one that had greeted me the previous night, stepped forward. In its massive hands, it held my offering from that morning. With ceremonial deliberateness, it placed the carved wooden figure in the replica of myself, creating a miniature scene of this exact moment. Message received. They understood representation, symbolism. Abstract thought. The largest of the 3 moved with shocking speed, covering 20 feet between us before I could react. It stopped just short of me, its musk filling my nostrils, its breathing audible and controlled. Slowly, it extended one enormous finger and touched the pendant at my neck. Recognition flickered in its deep-set eyes. Then it spoke. Not words, not language as humans define it, but vocalizations carrying unmistakable meaning. Deep, resonant tones that vibrated in my chest, interspersed with clicks and whistles impossible to transcribe. The sound shaped meaning directly in my mind, bypassing the need for linguistic processing. Constantine. Old friend. You wear his protection. Good. I staggered backward, overwhelmed by the impossible communication. The creature made no move to follow, remaining just beyond arm's reach. The other 2 joined it, forming a semicircle around me. Each carried something. One held a weather monitoring device I recognized from an abandoned research station 15 miles away, the other a digital camera that had gone missing from a tourist 3 years earlier, according to incident reports I'd reviewed. They were curious about human technology, studying it, studying us. The leader gestured toward the forest behind them, then to me, then back to the forest. An invitation, or a test. Every human instinct screamed danger, but I hadn't come to the Alaskan wilderness for safety. I'd come seeking something genuine, something beyond the sterile confines of modern existence. I nodded and took a step toward them. The forest ahead seemed to shift and darken, as if we were preparing to enter another realm entirely. The creatures turned and began walking, clearly expecting me to follow. I did. The deeper we traveled into the forest, the more profoundly the environment changed. Familiar Alaska taiga gradually transformed into something that couldn't possibly exist at this latitude. The trees grew massive, primordial, species I couldn't identify despite extensive forestry training. Ferns towered overhead. Phosphorescent fungi cast eerie blue-green light in shadowy hollows. The air grew warmer, heavier with moisture, carrying scents that belonged in no forest I'd ever studied. My 3 guides moved with perfect confidence through terrain that seemed deliberately disorienting. Several times I became certain we were walking in circles, only to emerge into clearings revealing we'd climbed higher into the mountains than should have been possible given our trajectory and duration. Time itself became unreliable. My watch continued ticking, but the sun's position contradicted its readings. What felt like an hour's hike would show mere minutes elapsed, while brief passages through dense undergrowth somehow consumed entire afternoon periods. We paused at what appeared to be a boundary of sorts, a perfect line where the altered forest I'd been experiencing gave way to something even more impossible. Beyond this point, the laws of nature as I understood them seemed increasingly optional. Tree trunks twisted in geometric patterns, rocks hovered inches above the ground, water flowed uphill along creek beds. The lead creature turned to me, gesturing at the boundary, then pointing at my chest. A question? Permission? Warning? I nodded, giving consent to whatever crossing we were about to make, and we proceeded. Another hour of increasingly surreal hiking brought us to our apparent destination, a vast clearing dominated by what I can only describe as architecture. Not built, but grown. Massive trees coaxed over generations to form walls, archways, enclosures. Stone and living wood intertwined in structures that served clear purpose while defying human engineering principles. And they were everywhere. Dozens of the creatures moved about the settlement, varying in size and coloration. Some noticed our arrival, pausing to observe me with the same intense curiosity I directed at them. Others continued their activities, crafting, food preparation, teaching younger members of their kind. A society, a civilization hidden within our world. At the clearing center stood the largest of their kind I'd seen, ancient, its hair graying, its movements deliberate with age. The 3 who had guided me approached this elder with postures of clear deference. Complex vocalizations were exchanged, that same resonant speech that conveyed meaning directly without linguistic processing. The elder approached me. Up close, the sheer physical presence was overwhelming. 9 feet tall minimum, with hands that could easily encircle my torso. Yet there was nothing threatening in its demeanor. It studied me with eyes deep set beneath a heavy brow, containing awareness that felt impossibly old. It reached out, movement slow enough not to startle, and lightly touched my forehead with one massive finger. Images flooded my mind. Not hallucinations, something transmitted directly through contact. I saw the history of this place through non-human perception. Glaciers retreating, forests emerging from barren ground. The first humans arriving, small and vulnerable. Conflict, initial fear. Then understanding, boundaries established. Patterns of interaction over thousands of years. Periods of communication alternating with separation. The arrival of European trappers and miners bringing violence. Retreat deeper into remaining wilderness. Adaptation, hiding, watching humanity spread across the continent. Nuclear testing in the Aleutians. Environmental changes accelerating. Concern for shared territories as climate shifted. Recent attempts to re-establish contact with specific humans deemed receptive. The connection broke, leaving me gasping. The elder stepped back, watching my reaction with what I could only interpret as measured assessment. A younger member of their kind approached, carrying something that stopped my breath. A ranger hat identical to mine, but decades old. The leather cracked with age. From a settlement across the clearing came another, bearing a collection of human items spread across a hide. Watches, compasses, cameras from various eras. Technology from different decades, all studied, many disassembled and reconstructed. They were archiving us, learning, adapting. The elder produced a small object, a stone tablet covered in symbols similar to those carved into my cabin door, but far more complex. It handed this to me with ceremony, wrapping my fingers around it with its enormous hand. As my skin contacted the stone, understanding formed. Not complete translation, but impressions. The tablet contained specific boundaries. Territories humans must not enter. Agreements made with indigenous peoples centuries earlier. Seasons when certain activities were permitted or prohibited. Maps of sensitive habitats. Warnings about places where the boundaries between worlds grew thin. Messages meant for whoever held the position of watcher at Nagit Li. The purpose of the ranger station crystallized with sudden clarity. It had never primarily been about managing wilderness for human benefit. It was about maintaining ancient boundaries between worlds, about having a human representative with whom they could communicate when necessary. Night had fallen during this exchange, the clearing illuminated by the same bioluminescent fungi I'd noticed during our journey. The creatures began preparations that clearly signaled the end of our meeting. The three who had guided me appeared, ready to lead me back. As we prepared to depart, commotion erupted at the settlement's edge. A younger member of their kind burst into the clearing, vocalizing with obvious distress. The gathered creatures stilled, listening. The elder's posture changed dramatically, alarm, then resolve. My guides turned to me with new urgency. One pointed toward the north, then made gestures mimicking walking, human-sized. The meaning was clear. People were approaching. Humans had crossed the boundary. A bark of command from the elder set the entire community in motion. Some began gathering young ones, others collected important items. Several of the largest males moved with purpose toward the northern boundary, their posture unmistakably protective. My guides hurried me away from the settlement, our return journey taking a different route from our arrival. We moved with greater speed, any pretense of leisurely escort abandoned. The transmission of urgency was clear, something dangerous approached, and I needed to return to my cabin immediately. We had crossed perhaps half the distance back when we heard the first gunshot echo through the forest. The gunshot changed everything. My guides froze, heads turning toward the sound with perfect synchronization. Their bodies tensed, postures shifting from escort to protective stance around me. More shots followed, the rapid succession of a semi-automatic rifle. The largest of the three made a decision, gesturing for the others to continue toward my cabin with me, while it veered toward the gunfire. Despite its massive size, it moved with shocking stealth, disappearing into the forest without disturbing a single branch. My remaining guides increased our pace, navigating the strange transitional forest with desperate urgency. The otherworldly elements receded as we crossed back into familiar terrain. Though even here, the forest seemed altered by our presence. Trees bending slightly away from our path, undergrowth parting to ease our passage. We emerged at the forest edge behind my cabin, just as dawn illuminated Lake Akiwaga, NG. The creatures stopped precisely at the boundary, unwilling to cross into the neutral territory surrounding the station. One of them pointed urgently toward the cabin, then to the lake beyond. A warning to stay inside, to remain on safe ground. I nodded understanding, then sprinted across the clearing. Inside, I grabbed the satellite phone, rifle, and flare gun, trying each in succession. The phone showed no signal. The rifle's firing mechanism had been subtly damaged, functional enough to appear normal upon inspection, but it would jam if fired. Only the flare gun remained operational, Constantine's words about fire echoing in my memory. Through the window, I saw my guides had vanished, retreating into the forest protection. But they weren't gone. I could feel their presence, watching, waiting from just beyond sight. The radio crackled to life with McKenna's voice, stripped of its usual calm professionalism. Repeat. Unidentified armed individuals approaching your station from the north. Not Park Service, not authorized. Satellite shows 3, possibly 4 heat signatures moving along the ridge trail. They disabled the weather station relay. I'm sending emergency response, but nearest team is 4 hours out. Do you copy? I grabbed the handset. I copy. Armed individuals approaching. What's their intent? Unknown, but they're carrying serious hardware. Thermal imaging picked up rifle signatures before the relay went down. Her voice dropped. Listen carefully. There's a hidden compartment beneath the east floorboard under your bunk. Emergency protocols. Authentication code, Denali 7 Tango. Get it now. I found the compartment exactly where she described, containing a sealed, waterproof packet. Inside, a satellite beacon with built-in GPS, a sidearm more substantial than standard Ranger issue, and a folder stamped with classification markings I didn't recognize. I've got it, I reported. What am I dealing with here, McKenna? People who've been hunting for what you've seen, she replied cryptically. The department has protected this region for generations, long before it became official parkland. These individuals, they've been tracking signs across the Pacific Northwest for years. Resource extraction companies want access to what's beyond the boundary. Others have more extreme motivations. You knew, I realized. About them. About everything here. Not everything. Just enough. Each ranger at Nagitli learns what they need to when they need to. Her tone softened. I'm sorry for the incomplete briefing, but experience can't be transferred secondhand. Did they make contact? Before I could answer, movement at the tree line caught my attention. A flash of unnatural color. The orange of synthetic fabric. Humans approaching with poor attempt at stealth. I ducked away from the window. They're here, I whispered into the radio. Armed civilians at the forest edge. Do not engage, McKenna ordered. Repeat, do not engage. You're on neutral ground. The cabin is protected by more than just park regulations. Stay inside until backup arrives. The connection dissolved into static as 3 figures emerged from the trees at the northwestern edge of the clearing. Men in expensive outdoor gear carrying high-powered rifles equipped with scopes and tactical attachments. They moved with the confidence of those accustomed to hunting, but their formation betrayed military or paramilitary training. They paused at the tree line, scanning the area with practiced efficiency. The leader pointed toward my cabin, then to the strange symbols carved into several trees marking the boundary. One man photographed these markings, while another consulted a device that appeared to be measuring electromagnetic frequencies. These weren't random hunters or resource prospectors. They knew exactly what they were looking for. As they started toward my cabin, the forest behind them erupted with activity. Massive shadows moved between trees with impossible speed. The distinctive sound of wood knocking echoed from multiple directions simultaneously, creating disorienting patterns that made location impossible to pinpoint. The intruders reacted immediately, switching from approach to defensive formation, rifles raised toward the forest. Their leader shouted something I couldn't distinguish at this distance. Whatever their purpose, they'd come prepared for this encounter. The knocking intensified, joined by deep vocalizations that resonated across the clearing. The patterns formed a complex rhythm that seemed to communicate specific information. The men responded by firing warning shots into the air, then directly into the forest when the sounds continued. I knew what would happen next. I'd been shown enough to understand the boundaries, the protocols, the ancient agreements these men were violating. If they crossed further into protected territory, especially with weapons and hostile intent, traditional restraint would be abandoned. I had minutes, perhaps seconds, to prevent bloodshed. Grabbing the flare gun, I burst from the cabin and ran to position myself between the armed men and the forest edge. I raised my hands, Ranger badge clearly visible. "Federal Wilderness Officer," I shouted. "You are trespassing in a restricted conservation area with unauthorized weapons. Lower your rifles immediately." The men hesitated, surprised by human intervention. Their leader, a weathered man with cold eyes and a face mapped with experience, assessed me with clinical detachment. Step aside, Ranger, he said, voice carrying the certainty of someone accustomed to command. You have no idea what you're protecting. I know exactly what I'm protecting, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. This land, these boundaries, have been maintained for generations. Whatever you're hunting isn't yours to find. His expression hardened. 3 research teams have disappeared in these mountains. 2 decades of evidence points to non-human intelligence operating in this region. We're not leaving without confirmation. You've already confirmed it, I said, nodding toward their photographer's camera. Those boundary markers are communication, evidence of intelligence. Take your documentation and leave. That's all you're getting today. Behind them, the forest had gone completely silent. No birds called. No branches moved in the breeze. Just perfect, waiting stillness that raised hairs on my neck. I knew they were there. Dozens of them, watching, poised at the edge of intervention. The leader seemed to sense the change as well, years of instinct making him glance back toward the 2 quiet trees. For a brief moment, I saw certainty waver in his expression. I pressed the advantage. Whatever you're hoping to achieve, this isn't the way. This place operates on agreements older than our government. Agreements that have kept peace for centuries. Break them at your peril. As if responding to my words, 3 distinct knocks sounded from directly behind the men, close enough that they should have seen the source, yet nothing visible had made the sound. All 3 spun, rifles raised toward the empty forest. I used their distraction to raise the flare gun and fire. The bright red star arced over the clearing, momentarily turning night to crimson day. In the strange illumination, dozens of massive silhouettes became briefly visible among the trees. Far more than the men could possibly engage. The message was unmistakable. The next rangers to patrol this forest will find whatever remains of you, I said quietly. Take your evidence. File your reports. But do it from beyond the boundary. Long seconds stretched as the leader calculated his options. Finally, he lowered his rifle and signaled his men to do the same. This isn't over, he said. It's been ongoing for thousands of years, I corrected him. You're just late to the conversation. They retreated with reluctance, maintaining defensive posture until they reached the ridge trail. Only when they disappeared from sight did the forest resume its normal sounds, birds cautiously resuming calls, wind moving through branches. I stood at the boundary until sunrise fully illuminated the clearing, knowing I was being watched from both sides. Park Service satellites overhead, ancient guardians from the forest depths. When McKenna's emergency response team arrived hours later, they found me sitting calmly on my cabin porch, the strange stone tablet openly displayed on the table beside me. Her expression upon seeing it confirmed what I'd suspected. She recognized its significance. You've crossed the boundary, she said. Not a question. They invited me, I replied simply. She nodded, unsurprised. It happens, occasionally, when they deem someone trustworthy, when circumstances require direct communication. She gestured to the tablet. That hasn't been seen by Ranger Service personnel in 30 years. It contains boundaries, agreements, things I need to know to do this job properly. Will you stay? She asked. Most Rangers request transfer after experiences like yours. I looked toward the forest edge, where a subtle movement caught my eye. Massive figures, just visible in the shadows, watching our interaction with undisguised interest. Not hiding, merely respecting boundaries, waiting to see what humanity would choose through its representative. I'll stay, I said. Someone needs to watch the boundary. That's what Nagitli means, after all. McKenna's relief was palpable. She glanced toward the forest, offering a small, respectful nod to the shadows there. The department will want reports, she said. Documentation, evidence. They'll get exactly what they need to maintain the protections. Nothing more. I picked up the stone tablet, feeling its ancient weight. Some boundaries exist for everyone's benefit. As the response team prepared to leave, I felt, rather than heard, a final communication from the forest. That same resonant meaning that bypassed language, impressing itself directly into understanding. Watcher at the edge. Guardian of boundaries. 2 worlds. 1 protection. I raised my hand toward the tree line, acknowledging the message and accepting the responsibility it conveyed. In the deepening twilight, a massive silhouette mirrored my gesture from just beyond the ancient boundary. Some wilderness remains truly wild not because humans haven't discovered it, but because we've had the wisdom to recognize when something isn't ours to claim. At Nagitli Station, I'd found my purpose as guardian of that wisdom, watcher at the edge between worlds that must remain both separate and connected. Beyond the boundary, something ancient waits. Not monster, not myth, but another intelligence with which we share this planet. And in this remote corner of Alaska, I've become the latest in a long line of rangers maintaining a peace far older and far more important than most of humanity will ever know.